Hey folks, welcome to summer. After many months of trials and tribulations, I'm now free to kick back, relax, and bask in the summer sun without a care in the world. Oh fuck, that's a beat! How do you most effectively use your free time? It can be hard to figure out. I mean, there's just nothing to do. Nothing! I have realized in recent times that my enthusiasm for gaming has sort of fallen off a cliff. This is hardly a unique experience, but I imagine some of it is just a normal part of growing up. When you become an adult, a lot of things just become less magical than they were when you were a kid. Combine that with adult responsibilities, which take up a lot more time now and sap a lot of my energy to do things when I do have spare time, and the fact that there are just so many more things competing for my attention now. And by more things competing for my attention, I actually mean my dopamine receptors are utterly fried to a crisp by the instant gratification provided by social media and cellular devices, and now my brain is barely even functional enough to keep me alive. As a result, I definitely have been playing games a lot less than I used to when I was younger. Recently, I looked back on the past couple of years and just realized, what did I even play? What did I even do? I had completely forgotten how to enjoy video games like I used to. But the thing is, when I do play games, I still have plenty of fun with them. The problem is just mustering up the motivation to play them. Yes, you heard it here first, I'm too tired to sit around and play video games. But point is, the passion that I once had for gaming is still in there somewhere, I just need to bring it out of hiding. So a couple of months ago, I realized I had free will and began a new quest to invest more of my time into playing video games, to enjoy more fun new experiences and hopefully rediscover my love for games that I had all those years ago. And if not, well, at the very least I have a hobby now. And one stop on this road to redemption was a game by the name of Kirby and the Forgotten Land. I've been a big fan of the Kirby series for a long time. Pretty much every Kirby game I've played has been fantastic and iconic, and they rank as some of my favorite gaming experiences of all time. And all of those games have been 2D platformers. 2D platformers done to near perfection, but still all 2D platformers. For the longest time, far longer than most major video game franchises, the Kirby series really dragged its feet on venturing into the realm of 3D. For years upon years, release after release, Kirby stubbornly stuck to two-dimensional gameplay. The closest it had gotten was that the camera changed angles in crystal shards and you could move between the background and foreground on the 3DS games. I personally was always sort of skeptical of 3D Kirby being a good idea. I thought that it would be interesting, but that Kirby's core formula just works better in 2D, and trying to add an extra dimension onto that would just make it feel weird. I figured that the people in charge of the Kirby series just weren't really interested in 3D and wanted to focus on making good 2D games. I think keeping Kirby as a 2D only series would work just fine, but there's no denying that there was always a lingering curiosity from myself and a lot of other people as to what 3D Kirby could look like. And eventually, Kirby did make his first foray into 3D in 2016 with the release of Kirby Planet Robobot on the 3DS. The main campaign was of course still a 2D platformer, but the game also came with a side mode called Kirby 3D Rumble. This is Kirby, but in 3D, and in a rumble. It's a pretty simple minigame, you just walk around inhaling and spitting out stuff to get a high score. You have no copy abilities, you can't hover infinitely, and you're confined to a small arena. It is simple, but it's still a pretty good adaptation of traditional Kirby gameplay into 3D. So clearly there was some potential for Kirby to actually work well with three-dimensional gameplay. And this potential would finally come to fruition in 2022 with Kirby and the Forgotten Land for the Nintendo Switch. So let us go forth into Kirby's latest big console adventure. What is this, some kind of the Forgotten Land? No game review would be a proper game review without talking about presentation. As far as visuals, I can safely say that Kirby and the Forgotten Land is quite a good-looking game. You can tell it's a good-looking game from the way that it looks. The art style is charming and colorful and cartoony as always. As far as sound design, I can also confirm that Forgotten Land does sound pretty good. The soundtrack is excellent, as it always is in Kirby games. Of course, it doesn't matter how a game looks or sounds if it sucks, so what's really gonna make or break the experience is the gameplay. And I can confirm, the gameplay is also pretty good. It controls really well. Kirby's 3D movement feels so natural and feels like a perfect exact translation of the gameplay of the 2D games. It really does just feel like a 2D Kirby game in 3D. You can run and jump and inhale enemies as always, but the 3D gameplay does come with one notable limitation. Kirby can't float infinitely. After a couple of floats, he'll start to barely maintain his height and then slowly descend to the ground. It is kinda jarring since Kirby has pretty much always been able to float infinitely. Though it is understandable why they made this change. I imagine it's somewhat more difficult to make challenging levels that account for the infinite float in 3D compared to 2D. And it doesn't really feel all that limiting because you still have enough float for it to not feel restrictive, and the levels are all designed around the limited float, but it does feel a little off. Kirby also has a new ability to dodge attacks by crouching and then moving the joystick in any direction. It's pretty fun to use, and if you dodge an attack at the right moment, the game goes slow-mo for a couple of seconds, which gives you an opening to land some attacks. I remember dicking around with it a bit when I first started the game, but then I completely forgot about it until embarrassingly late when I basically needed it to beat a certain boss. But as long as you remember to use it, it is a pretty handy mechanic. Of course, Kirby's core gameplay would be nothing without the copy abilities, and they certainly exist in this game. Generally, they're alright, but I do feel like they were pretty weak in this game compared to usual. For starters, the amount of abilities on offer here is kinda pathetic. Forgotten Land only has 12 copy abilities available, and 2 of them are joke abilities. For context, Return to Dreamland had 25, Planet Robobot had 27, and Star Allies had 29. It is a massive step down from the variety that Kirby games typically offer, and it makes the copy abilities get pretty repetitive at times. However, as a trade-off, Forgotten Land also introduces the mechanic of copy ability evolution, in which you can upgrade your copy abilities into new and improved versions. They're not always straight upgrades. In some cases they're different enough that one form of an ability doesn't necessarily negate another, though I never felt any desire to go back to a lower evolution of a copy ability after getting an upgrade. But still, I think this is an innovative mechanic. I like the idea of putting an effort to find blueprints and get enough coins and materials to improve your abilities over time and make yourself more powerful. And a lot of the upgraded abilities are really creative in their design and gameplay. And with the addition of these copy ability evolutions, the number of different abilities available in the game goes from 12 up to 36. Only problem is, that's only the case if you really stretch the definition of different. Yes, the upgraded abilities are different from their original forms, but as is inherent to them being upgrades, they aren't so different as to make the general experience using them meaningfully different from their lesser counterparts. The evolutions are definitely cool, but they aren't a suitable substitute for the variety in gameplay that would have been offered by all the other abilities that got left out. Lack of variety aside, I think the copy abilities on their own merits do get the job done. However, a lot of them just aren't fun to use in my opinion, feeling kinda clunky and not all that useful a lot of the time. A lot of them feel sluggish and ineffective, not awful, but just not very interesting. The only ones that I really find somewhat enjoyable are Drill, Hammer, and Sword, with Sword being my overall favorite. Unfortunately, even the good abilities feel kinda lackluster because every single ability is plagued by a critical issue: a lack of variety. For the most part, each ability has a ground attack, an aerial attack, maybe a charge attack, and that's it. This is abysmal compared to what I'm used to in Kirby games. Normally, Kirby games go absolutely ham with the amount of moves you can pull off with an ability. They were so wacky and fun, using every button input and combo possible and really pushing you to explore all the different ways that you can use each ability. But here, with few exceptions, there's no dash attack, no upward attack, no downward attack, no combos, no nothing. Meanwhile, the L, R, Z, L, and ZR buttons are all used just for the crouch. Forgotten Land severely curtails your options with copy abilities, and it can get really stale just using the same couple abilities with the same couple of moves over and over. Despite all my problems with them though, the copy abilities are not bad in this game. They are perfectly functional and still offer at least a decent amount of fun. I just found them to be kind of undercooked, and they definitely could have been utilized a lot better. This game also introduces Mouthful Mode, which in a sense offers more abilities, but Mouthful Mode and the copy abilities coexist with each other. Each serves a different purpose in the gameplay, and you get to keep your ability when using Mouthful Mode. Mouthful Mode is an assortment of objects which Kirby can wrap around and basically possess. They radically alter the way that you move around the levels, and they're required for clearing certain puzzles and obstacles. The Mouthful forms are really fun, and they're utilized in creative ways that test your skills and make you think. And best of all, you get to play as a car. Despite my gripes with the copy abilities, the gameplay is still overall a very enjoyable experience. It's sort of difficult to explain why some games are fun because it's not really an objective thing you can measure, but I can at least say this. The levels have a great mix of linear platforming and exploration, testing your abilities to clear obstacles, fight enemies, and solve puzzles. There's an abundance of hidden secrets, extra side challenges and puzzles, and a large array of collectibles to obtain throughout the game. Each level has a ton of depth to it, and they all really scratch that itch for adventure and exploration. And each level manages to feel distinct, with no gimmick ever overstaying its welcome, which helps keep the gameplay fresh and dynamic. In addition to the normal levels, there are also the extra Treasure Road challenges. These involve using a specific copy ability or mouthful form to complete a set of challenges designed to test your skills with each ability. These stages aren't really my favorite, but they're a nice way to switch up the gameplay from time to time. One of the collectibles you'll be tasked with obtaining throughout the adventures is these little capsules containing a variety of figures, more on those later. The other collectible is a bunch of imprisoned Waddle Dees scattered throughout the levels. You get a few automatically after beating each level, but there's also a bunch of them that are hidden and require a bit more effort to find. The Waddle Dees here basically function as the game's primary collectible necessary for 100% completion, and importantly, unlocking various extra features in the Waddle Dee Town. The Waddle Dee Town is the game's main hub world, which contains a bunch of extra stuff separate from the main adventure. Right off the bat, the interactions with the Waddle Dees are adorable. You can use the D-pad to do a few different emotes, and the Waddle Dees will wave back at you when you wave to them, which is just delightful. Beyond that though, Waddle Dee Town offers a couple amenities that can help you out in the main campaign. For one, this is where you find the shop that provides the copy ability upgrades that I mentioned earlier. There's also the Waddle Dee Cafe, where you can buy a food item to bring along with you, which will let you heal yourself on the fly if you're getting low on health. They're not really necessary to have, and to be honest, I kind of forgot about them for most of the campaign anyway, but they can be helpful. There's this item delivery thing where you can input various present codes from both the game itself and various online sources, which can get you a variety of items. It's a fun idea, but I never really used it. Then there's the item shop, where you can buy a couple items that you can carry with you to boost certain attributes. The life up gives you a second health bar, the attack boost increases the damage you deal for 200 seconds, and the speed boost increases your movement speed for 200 seconds. You can get all three boosts simultaneously, and with the attack boost and speed boost, you can buy and use up to 5 at a time to increase the duration of their effects up to 999 seconds. Honestly, these upgrades do feel a little broken, and I don't think they're super necessary for the main adventure. I never used them, and honestly, I didn't even realize they existed until right at the end of the game. They are pretty handy for speedrunning the Coliseum though. Overall, I like these extra features because they can be useful on your adventure, and they also provide a purpose to the star coin things that you collect. In past games, the only purpose of the stars would be getting a 1-up once you collect 100 of them. In this game, you don't have lives. In fact, when you die, you instead lose 100 star coins, and you use the star coins for these things instead. It provides more incentive to try to find them and actually makes them worth your time. Waddle Dee Town also offers some extra activities and minigames to do separate from the main adventure. First off, Kirby has a house here, which isn't super useful, but it's still a cute inclusion. The wall will gradually fill up with pictures as you complete certain objectives throughout the game. You can look through a scrapbook to read little snippets about past Kirby games, and you can sleep in the bed to recover your health. Then there's this fishing minigame in which you basically just have to press the button that the game tells you to. It's simple and pretty easy, but it's a charming little distraction. The next minigame on offer is at the Waddle Dee Cafe, in which you can work there, which entails having to select the correct food ordered by each Waddle Dee. It's simple, but it can actually get pretty fast-paced and engaging on the hard difficulty, and you also get paid for doing it. Then there's the Tilt and Roll Kirby minigame, in which you have to use motion controls to navigate a ball through an obstacle course. It actually can get pretty tough on the harder difficulties, and it provides some variety by testing your patience and ability to adapt to the motion controls rather than just testing your reaction time. There's also the Theater, which allows you to rewatch cutscenes from throughout the game, but I never really used it. And lastly, there are these gotcha machines in which you can pay star coins to get a random one of the figures that I mentioned earlier. Functionally, the figures are basically useless besides being another box to tick for 100% completion, but they are kinda neat to look at, and you can even display them in your house. Figures are obtainable throughout the game's levels and through completing various other objectives, but they can also be obtained through these machines, and in fact some of them can only be obtained through this method. If you're ever feeling discouraged from a streak of bad luck on these things and feel like giving up so you don't keep wasting your money, just remember that that's what all gamblers think right before they hit it big. The last side game on offer is the Coliseum. This is basically a boss rush where you have to beat a gauntlet of the game's bosses with a limited supply of food provided between fights. Longtime Kirby fans will recognize that this mode is just the arena by another name. The boss fights aren't really my favorite element of this game, but they're not bad by any means, and this is the only place you can fight Meta Knight, so the Coliseum makes for a pretty interesting challenge. Finally, spoiler alert for a game that's been out for over a year, there's also some nifty endgame content. After you beat the main story, you'll unlock the Ultimate Cup in the Coliseum, which features more bosses than the first Meta Knight Cup that you unlock midway through the adventure. Then there's the Waddle Dee Band, which lets you listen to songs from the game's soundtrack. The Waddle Dees actually play in time with the music, and Kirby and his floating chinchilla friend and the other Waddle Dees also bounce along, which is just adorable. Perhaps most importantly, you also unlock an entirely new story campaign called the Isolated Isles: Forgo Dreams. This is a set of stages that are basically big amalgamations of levels from each world in the main game, but with a higher difficulty. It's enjoyable, but not all that interesting since again, you're basically just replaying a bunch of the same levels that you already played. Once you beat the Isolated Isles campaign and beat the Ultimate Cup in the Coliseum, you'll unlock the Ultimate Cup Z, which features all the harder versions of bosses that you fight in the Isolated Isles, along with 2 new bosses unique to the Cup. This is basically the equivalent of the True Arena from other Kirby games, and it's a pretty good challenge. Finally, you also unlock 2 new copy ability upgrades, one being the Masked Hammer after beating the main adventure, and the other being the Morpho Knight Sword after beating the Isolated Isles. These evolutions are a little overpowered, but they're a lot of fun to use and actually have relatively diverse movesets. Too bad there's no reason to play the game anymore. The last thing I'll mention is that this game also offers multiplayer. A second player can join in on the fun as Bandana Waddle Dee, so you can play both the main story and the minigames side by side with a friend. The multiplayer gameplay works quite well, with the only real issue being the restrictions of the camera, but that's sort of an inherent problem with 3D multiplayer anyway. My only gripes with it are that the second player can only play as Bandana Waddle Dee and thus isn't able to use copy abilities or the mouthful mode, and the fact that the game only allows for 2 players rather than 4 like in other games. Obviously 4 players is probably a lot harder to do in 3D, but it still would have been nice to see. Overall, Kirby and the Forgotten Land is an excellent game. Although I have a few problems with it, it still upholds the high standard of charm and polish set by previous games in the series. It handles the transition from 2D to 3D pretty much flawlessly, and it makes for an excellent first big experiment with the third dimension that bodes well for future 3D Kirby adventures. It's well designed, it's fun, and I had an absolutely delightful time playing through it. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is a wonderful title that has plenty to offer in the realm of excellent level design and well-crafted gameplay. I would highly recommend it, as it's a great way to pass the time while you're trying to keep your cool around bees, because I've decided that I am not gonna let the bastards win. I let them win.